Awumamahloni. You should be ashamed. It's a sentiment that carries across language and culture. But what is it serving? And is it time for us to unlearn it? Let's talk about that today. Hello and welcome to Sangoma Society, where we demystify the ancestral. Mina Ngingumakhosi uNomabuto Emsamo. I am Honey Tell a Story on all social media platforms, and Ngingu Hani Wagamakwako to my parents. And this is Sangoma Society, where we demystify the ancestral. Today, I'd like to return to our series on language and the phrases and language that we use and internalize and identify with consciously or unconsciously. And the reason why I belabor language so much is because when we go through the processes of initiation, edlozini, ukuthwasa, that is learning the language of our ancestors. There are certain processes and rites and rituals that are rooted in language. The language that gives us an open line of communication with our ancestors. But we always say in this house that the point of departure towards building a relationship with your ancestors starts by building a relationship with yourself. So considering the things that you've internalized is key. Amahloni, shame. A teaspoon of amahloni could avoid otherwise regrettable behavior. That's the sentiment. Amahloni keeps you from running your name through the mud. Having shame keeps you within your moral boundaries. This is the theory behind the concept of shame, having it as a virtuous thing. But we know now, in this day and age, the pitfalls of shame, how shame can silence us, how shame can keep us from speaking up, how shame can protect those whom do us harm. We know all this, and yet we still subscribe to the concept of amahloni. At which point do we set aside shame in favor of speaking up, in favor of doing what we want to do, in favor of throwing caution to the wind? What I've come to learn about shame is how it silences us. And in the silencing grows doubt about the very thing that we may or may not be ashamed of. When we're having an experience and we do not speak up about it, when we allow shame to silence us, we allow the very thing that we are ashamed of to grow in the shadows that shame gives it. Shame insulates the very thing that we're ashamed of in doubt from ourselves. We begin to second guess if the thing is really what it is. Because in the silence of shame, there are no affirming voices. There are no interrogating voices. They are only the voices we have within ourselves. The same voices that encouraged us to be silenced for shame. Amahloni ayasilimaza. Noma kuthiwa ukukhala kusizi. It's discouragement from crying out about what you find yourself faced with. And at the same time, a call to action that to cry on the matter does not help when action is what could bring a result. But how do you act sometimes when you feel doubtful about your reason for acting to begin with? Shame puts distance between ourselves and the ability to interrogate the object of our shame. I've seen shame manifest in various ways over a myriad of subjects. More often than not, in the case where a victim does not feel that they are the perfect victim, where a victim feels as though they may or may not have participated in some or other part of how it is that they became a victim of the thing that they are now ashamed of. And that silence encourages that doubt, and that doubt protects the very thing which victimizes us. There is no shame in being a victim of something. There is great courage in speaking. There is great courage in defending yourself. There is great courage in speaking up against an injustice which is happening to you. But there is so much that is systemic, that has gone on for generations, that we have accepted as part of how things are, that is protected by the silence of shame. And this is the aspect of shame which it may be time to let go of. The concept of shame, Amahloni itself, is something that is rooted in the pursuit of virtue. And yet, when you look at the context in which shame becomes a silencer, there seems to be an integration of that with pride. Because if it happens to someone, that kind of person is the kind of person that sort of thing happens to, but not us. Not the bearer of the shame. We see it in the context of society, broader society, for instance, with how the average person cannot process and understand themselves as a victim of capitalism. Because the way that capitalism sells itself to the middle class is not with the reality that they are cogs in the system of this oppression, but rather that as a member of the middle class, you are simply a temporarily embarrassed billionaire. And if you just work in this way for this period of time and keep the shame and keep the silence about the oppressive nature of capitalism to a minimum, then you can enjoy the benefits of being within the billionaire, elusive billionaire class when your time comes, without anything worth being ashamed of marring your record. That's one way, that's just one example of how shame silences us. Shame in the indignity of what it is to live in a certain way. For instance, in this example, as a middle-class person within the context of capitalism in our current global economic disposition. It's one example. There are many more, much closer to home, that keep us from community. Examples that show and illustrate how being silenced by shame robs us of community and robs us from being able to take the action that will ultimately benefit us and find ourselves in good company when we do so. We often imagine that we should be able to have the answers before speaking, that we should know certain things. Especially in the context of this channel and what we talk about here, I have found that shame silences people from asking the questions that really, really hold the key to their understanding about the ancestral. They find themselves silenced in not being able to ask the simple questions, the questions for which they imagine they should know the answers, but should know based on what? Should know based on being Black, based on being African, and yet completely disregarding the political context in which we find ourselves, requiring platforms such as this. There's so much that we suffer in silence due to the virtue of shame, having shame. Awumamahloni. Ekubeni ayinamahloni into. There is no shame in not knowing certain things. There is no shame in finding yourself in a certain position. There is no shame in needing certain kind of help, in requiring community, in needing community, in needing guidance, in not knowing. And yet, we subscribe to the virtue of shame to our own detriment. We are the ones who are harmed by the doubt that festers in the silence that shrouds our shame. So, where is your shame serving you? And where is your shame silencing you? Where is your shame keeping you from asking for the help that you need? I have a few experiences of my own. I might share them in the comments down below, and I hope that you share some of yours. I appreciate you for joining us in this conversation about shame and its pitfalls here on Sangoma Society, where we demystify the ancestral. You can find us on all social media platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. For more resources on how you can build a lasting relationship with your ancestors, you can visit www.sangomasociety.com. Until next time, Ukhanye.